Andrew Yang had a former MSNBC producer on his podcast recently. She actually quit MSNBC not too long ago. She talks a lot about how ratings drive coverage. She talks a lot about the obsession that MSNBC had with Trump. She talks a lot about the anger, actually, that she had in editorial meetings. It's an interesting interview. I highly recommend watching it. I'm going to talk a little bit about my reaction to this as a former TV news reporter and as somebody who was a producer back a long time ago for Fox News Channel, for the morning show Fox and Friends. I think this interview with Yang, and this woman's name is Ariana Pekary, it's informative for a few reasons, not just because it kind of confirms some of the thoughts that people have had for a long time about what especially sort of the cable news shows are about. And not just that, but how these biases and the ratings battle and everything can creep into the allegedly objective network news shows, and then how sometimes that can then even trickle down into local news, which is how I finished up my TV news career. Before we get started, as always, it helps if you would like to support my work just by liking, sharing, subscribing. Make sure you're subscribed. Leave me a comment in the comment section, engaging with the material. Tells YouTube, hey, this is a video that you should put in front of other people. So I really appreciate it when you do that. Of course, there are also links in the description for how you can support me through Patreon and PayPal. But the first thing I want to do before we get into the reaction that I have to this podcast is to show you a quick clip that describes the near obsession that this woman said MSNBC had with President Trump prior to the 2016 election and then following it, and how that determined their coverage moving forward. So take a listen to this.
It always turned into a segment about Trump. You know, they don't want to talk about anything that is negative towards Democrats because that was bad for the MSNBC audience. And the same thing, you know, applied to the Democratic primaries as well. There just wasn't a full discussion that ultimately benefits everyone. So
I think I might have been part of that or a non-part of that.
Yeah.
So you hear Yang laugh that he was a part of or not a part of that, basically referring to the fact that he and other outlier candidates like Tulsi Gabbard were given nowhere near the amount of coverage as candidates like Joe Biden. And if you check out this woman's Twitter feed, look what she just posted. So again, Ariana Pekary. Actually, I just reviewed my journal on 4/25/19. I was told that we were never to pursue Andrew for an interview on our show, along with several others. The list of candidates was dictated, but the reasons for allowing them or not were not explained. Some of the commentary that I have seen about this conversation that Ariana Pekary had with Andrew Yang focused on this particular point, that she's claiming Yang and other candidates, maybe Tulsi Gabbard, I don't know, she doesn't specify, but that they were essentially blackballed from coverage. I think that actually that is more a reflection of what she brought up multiple times in the conversation, if you understand the entire context, that this is an offshoot of fixation on President Trump and personality conflict specifically and controversy. She said many times that it always went back to Trump, that the coverage was all about Trump, and it was about controversy and personality conflict related to Trump. And the reason that I think, and this is just my humble opinion here, that somebody like Yang then didn't get coverage the way that she felt like he should have discussing policy is because Yang, for instance, was one of those people who didn't voter shame Trump supporters, but looked at the politicians and the failures in policy and tried to offer solutions to that, understanding that maybe there was actually a reason besides the personality conflict issues or being racist or sexist or whatever else that people voted for Trump. That maybe there were policy failures that for whatever reason, people saw Trump as the solution. Check out this article from February 7, 2020, Business Insider. The headline is From Trump Train to Yang Gang. Meet the conservatives and swing voters who have fallen hard for Andrew Yang. Or this from CBS News, January 29, 2020. Tulsi Gabbard appeals to Trump voters. That may be an obstacle. My thoughts are that these two challenged the broken record of media coverage over Trump and the people who voted him in. And that didn't just shine a light on a failure of policy, but also a failure of coverage by the media themselves. So I think this is the real story, actually. And I think what she talked about in the podcast reflects exactly this, because what happened with the media, mainstream media, especially just the national networks and the cable news shows, how journalists and the way they talk on social media changed under Trump, the way the headlines changed under Trump, the way you have the New York Times saying that he challenges their objectivity. I think that was the headline I read once on this channel a couple times, like their norms of objectivity had to be kind of, well, at least either re-examined or if not thrown out the window because they felt like he was such a danger to the country. The way all that changed with Trump, I really question what happens moving forward. And so I think that is the heart of the conversation here, is what happened over the last 4-5 years leading into the election in 2016, for instance. She talks about how she wanted to have polls, covered in their newscast that showed low enthusiasm or lower enthusiasm for Hillary Clinton that may have not boded well for her campaign, but people didn't want to put that on the news for whatever reason. And so she, grow increasingly frustrated in these editorial meetings because people didn't want to put those polls on the news. That reflects sort of the disconnect that I saw among people on the night of the election. I was assigned to cover the Clinton watch party in Seattle, and people were stupefied at the end that Trump had won the election. And I think that's a reflection of the coverage they were watching, because that very night, MSNBC was the channel chosen. And not just the anchors, but the people they were talking to were sort of shocked in horror over the results. Whereas there were people I knew, like including myself, who, I'll be honest with you, the first one to say I thought Hillary Clinton would have won, but by a little bit, not by a ton, not by what a lot of people thought. So even though I was kind of like, okay, I guess she didn't, I wasn't shocked that it went the other way, because I thought it was going to be close. I didn't think it was going to be a landslide. All these things that have changed in the Trump era have, I believe, led to a disconnect, really a growing disconnect, not just among people like your family members, but among like classes, sort of like, the sort of establishment elite class, and sort of the average American who probably still wants to know more about policy, is having a hard time with the economy right now and unemployment, with the pandemic, with lockdowns, with all kinds of issues, feeding their family, wanting to know about healthcare, all of that stuff. And in the Trump era, again, like Pew Research has shown, the majority about his presidency was about personality, not policy. Are we past the point of no return on how we talk about what's going on in this country and the policies that deserve attention? And is this a reflection of that? Not to focus so narrowly on Yang being blackballed, as she said, from MSNBC, but what was that a symptom of? I think that's the real question, and that's the real conversation to have here, especially moving forward, because they talk about what could fix this, like what could fix where we're at with the media. And I think that's a fascinating conversation to have. Maybe just the competition on YouTube, for instance, is helpful to that. Of course, people just go to their own corners on YouTube and find whatever they want to applaud their own confirmation bias. That, of course, happens. But there are important critiques and important ideas out here in the YouTube sphere, even if a lot of times they end up getting demonetized. That's a video for another day. I would like to just hear what you all think about this. What are your thoughts on the podcast? Check it out. Again, link in the description, link to the Pew Research. If you want to just refresh your memory on all that, that's in the description. The ways you can support my work, also in the description. But remember, just leaving me a comment, liking, sharing, subscribing, all that good stuff. That really does help. And I really am interested in what you think. What you think about where we're at now, sort of post 5 years of this content that she discusses in this podcast. And do you think that changes moving forward? I'm curious to know. Anyway, guys, Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.